Welcome into our Backyard Brothers podcast. We're happy to talk about college football. I don't know about the rest of you, Cody and Dustin. This season feels like a lame duck season, honestly, uh, because so many changes are happening next year. You have the 12 team playoff starting next year. You have all of this conference realignment. Pac-12 pretty much dissipating into Big Ten and Big 12. You've got SEC getting some teams from the Big 12. You've got ACC talking about moving as well. You got all of these things happening, and so this season kind of feels like, what's the point? Everything's going to change after this year. Uh, I don't know if either of you two have anything to add or any pushback on that, but this season feels like one of the most anticlimactic seasons I've ever been a part of. So
I can see where you're coming with that. I would give a little pushback on it, mainly because uh, being a Utah fan, being in the Pac-12, it's kind of almost like a um, Pac-12's last dance kind of idea mentality. And so I think that I would hope at least that most schools and teams are thinking, well, let's make this the best, since it's gonna be the last one for the Pac-12, or we assume it will be, make it the best one yet, and finish it strong. So I think at least on that side of the country, it looks like it's kind of let's finish this out strong. And I know we'll talk more about that conference in this podcast, but everywhere else, I could see your argument for sure.
yeah, um, it kind of feels. We'll talk about the Pac-12 here soon, but it kind of feels like Oregon State and Washington State are showing up to this party and looking around and no one's there. So I don't know. I'm sure they're going to be swept up too, but I think they're the only two that haven't yet. So okay, well, we're going to talk about college football. We're gonna go conference by conference, not necessarily team by team, because we don't want to talk about 130 teams. So we're going to talk about conferences though, and kind of talk about some of the major players from each of those conferences. So let's just start Power Five and alphabetically with the ACC. This is one of the conferences that didn't really have a whole lot of movement. There's not a whole lot of teams moving from this conference yet, although Clemson and Florida State are in talks with the SEC apparently to start moving over there to join their rivals. You know, Clemson, Georgia Tech, and Florida State to join South Carolina, Georgia, and Miami. Or I'm not, I mean Florida. The kind of their rivals that are in another conference, and so there's that possibility. The one change that is happening in a lot of conferences this year, including the ACC, is that they've got rid of divisions within the conference. It's just 15 teams now, and no longer does the top team in one division play the top team in the other for the championship. Instead, it's just the two best teams in that conference play each other for the conference title game. So I like that change for the most part. There's some, I think there could be some issues with that, but for the most part I like it. Last year it was Clemson destroying North Carolina in the championship game, but Clemson still lost three games, and so they weren't part of the college football playoff for the first time in, I don't know, 5 years. So let's talk about the ACC. Some of the teams from there. You've got again Clemson and Florida State should be top of the ACC this year. Maybe North Carolina joining them again, but beyond them, I'm not sure we have a whole lot of teams to talk about. But what do you guys think about some of these teams here?
Yeah, I'll start first. I think that um, there's the two top dogs you mentioned, Florida State, Clemson. But I think there's a total of five teams that you can look at in that conference that can have a sway or have a lot of power in that. I think that's so Florida State, Clemson. I think it's North Carolina. I think it's Pitt as well. And then I'm actually high on Wake Forest as well this year. I expect a lot from Wake Forest, to be honest, and I think that they can cause a lot of problems for for teams like Clemson or Florida State. But those are the five that I would mention. but I'm not sure if we're sharing our own thoughts on who's going to be in the top or not yet.
Absolutely, go
Uh,
ahead.
but I think that it is going to, in the end, it's going to be Florida State and Clemson. I think that they're just going to end that together. I think it's been a great game between them, though. I think Florida State has it this year, though. I think they are looking really, really good, really, really scary. But like I said, there's those five teams, the four other teams, I should say, other than Florida State, that I think can cause some contention in that conference.
Yeah. I yeah, I also think
Yeah,
it's gonna
like
be. Go ahead, Dustin.
yeah, like you mentioned, ACC is kind of in a weird position. So I imagine recruiting has been difficult more so years because a player asks, for example, asks Dabo, "Hey, where are you going to be in 2 or 3 years?" Whenever I'm looking at being the star on the team, he says, I don't know. He doesn't know if he's going to be part of the SEC or the Big Ten or still in the ACC, and so recruiting maybe harder at that point, but. I still expect that, as Cody mentioned, Clemson and Florida State will be at the top of that. Hopefully, recruiting can go well, especially with the legacy that those two teams have. That they can still pull in some top talent, so that wherever they are in a few years can compete heavily.
Yeah. Um, and we again, I also think we're going to come down to a Florida State Clemson thing. Those two teams do play early in the year. I think it's a home game for Clemson, but so you could expect Clemson to maybe be at the top there, but they've really lost a lot to the NFL in the last few years, and last year showed that. Their quarterback DJ, however you pronounce that last name, he's gone. He was benched halfway through the year for another guy, Cade Klubnik, I think his name was, and Ui Gaga whatever his name is, transferred somewhere else. I think we'll talk about him
Oregon
soon.
State.
Oregon State, yeah, that's right. And so Clemson's going through quarterback situation. Florida State finding their way through, but uh, as sleepers, Cody, you mentioned Wake Forest. I think that's a good team to mention as possibly uh, crashing that party. Uh, I always like NC State. I think that they're well coached. I think that they always seem to be right there and can't seem to quite beat Clemson. That's a team for my in my opinion to look out for. And Pittsburgh, as you mentioned as well, as a definite possibility to do that, along with North Carolina.
And real quick, just to mention, I mean, and we don't have to, and we're not going to talk about it long, but I don't know if anything's going to happen with ACC and changes because they're locked in through 2036 and they'd have to pay a pretty hefty fee to exit. And so I don't think anything's going to happen in the
Oh,
ACC for a long time.
okay, that's a good point. I didn't know that. I just knew that Clemson and Florida State had both been talked to about that possibility. But if it's going to cost a whole lot of money, they may not leave. They're
Yeah,
doing fine.
I think it's going to be 20, $30 million or something like that to exit. Something crazy, ridiculous.
Okay,
But yeah.
yeah. Any last thoughts about the ACC from any of us?
I just feel bad for Virginia. They've really been bad last few years. They've been taking a big hit in recruiting, and then just to mention, I don't know if we talked about it or not last year, but they had that tragedy last year as well with three of their players getting shot and killed.
Mhm.
And so I just feel bad for them. I want them to do well. I just don't see it happening for them. But that's the last thing I was gonna say.
Well, I mean, they did. I think Virginia was in the ACC championship game 2 years ago, 3 years ago, something like that, when Bronco Mendenhall was the coach, and they
Mm.
uh, they won enough games. It was before they changed all this whole division thing, where you just had to be the best team in your division, and that was the case. They were the worst. They were a horrible division that they ended up winning, and then got steamrolled by Clemson. But so they were good with Bronco, but now Bronco's gone. So yeah. Okay, let's move to an exciting conference to talk about, Big 12. This conference has 4 new teams this year. And before Texas and Oklahoma moved to the SEC, so you have a pretty good, and you have an interesting dynamic with 4 new teams. You got BYU, Cincinnati, Central Florida, and I'm missing one. Houston. Thank you. Yeah, all joining the Big 12. And so you have 16 teams this year in the Big 12 before before a bunch of crap happens. I don't even want to go into everything other than Texas and Oklahoma leaving and a few other teams joining and other teams leaving and a bunch of stuff. But last year, obviously, TCU goes from unranked to all the way to number 2. They shock Ohio State, or is it right? No, not Ohio State.
Michigan.
They shock Michigan in the college football playoff, and then get is embarrassed the right word, or is that not straight? So by Georgia in the national championship game. So TCU loses. I think they had 9 players drafted in the draft this last year. Just a whole lot of players leaving to the NFL, and so including quarterback, including the starting running back, 3 wide receivers. Is that offense going to be in trouble with so many players leaving to the NFL? And I have other.
I imagine that their recruiting did pretty well this past year. You know, able to see what they did. I imagine that they recruited pretty well.
Most likely, that's yeah. I think. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, Sonny Dykes is the head coach there. First year, he gets them to the college football playoff national championship and loses in a very brutal way, but they still were there. Other teams to talk about, you always want to talk about Oklahoma and Texas and their last foray in the Big 12. Texas loses their maybe one of college football's best players, their running back, Bijan Robinson, drafted top 10 in the NFL. But those 2 teams can be talked about as potential big kind of players in that conference. Who else do you guys want to mention?
Well, just a couple of things I want to mention first before I get there is I was looking at it in TCU. Yeah, they have 3 players returning on offense, and so, but I think that other than Texas and Oklahoma being looked at, I think K-State, Kansas State, they did really good last year as well. They ended up beating TCU actually in their
That's
conference
right, they did.
championships.
Mm-hmm.
But then they lost Deuce Vaughn, the toddler in a football uniform. Not sure if you guys saw videos of him with the Cowboys, but it really does look like a miniature Kyler Murray, which is saying something. So anyway, I was looking at Texas. I think Texas has a lot to bring, obviously, to the table, and the quarterback situation most likely Quinn Ewers is going to be playing, and he's on a heck of a quarterback. But then his backup, if he's not doing very well, is Arch Manning, the number
Arch
one
Manning,
prospect, and I think since even more so than Trevor Lawrence was, right? I think so.
Yeah, the number 1 player in all of high school. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and understandably so, he's Cooper Manning's
Cooper's
son.
son. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no, in my opinion, unless they both suck, which is really unlikely, they're going to have a heck of a QB playing. Quinn Ewers, and if he's not, they have Arch Manning playing. Yeah, they lost Bijan Robinson, but they're still returning 8, I believe it is. No, 9 players on offense. So this is a team that's really looking good, and their really main good games that they have to worry about is Alabama week 2, and then some of their normal teams such as Kansas State, things like that, Oklahoma. So they have a fairly okay schedule to go in with, looking really good. So I think it's going to be a Texas win all the way for them this year. And if it's not, it's a pretty big disappointing season for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, to piggyback off of that, this is the year that both Texas and Oklahoma really have to have a great season in the Big 12. You know, they both kind of want to be top 15, top 10 at the end of the season. going into the SEC, and so I expect them to really have a great season, both of them. As you mentioned, Texas maybe is the best setup for success, but I wouldn't count out some of the other teams like Kansas State, TCU, even some of the smaller ones like Cincinnati, who's had years of greatness from occasionally over the last decade or so.
And something we didn't mention was Oklahoma last year. They finished the losing record last year. And so this is a team that's trying to get into the SEC, and last year they fumbled everything. Head coach, the Clemson guy? I can't remember his name right now.
Venables, Brent
Venables,
Venables.
yeah, Brent Venables. They really struggled last year, but you can't expect a school like Oklahoma to be down for long. But and Dustin, you mentioned Cincinnati. I think this is a cool season, bringing those four schools on board, four schools that have been in the group of five, top of the group five for years. Central Florida went to the college football playoff. No, they almost did. They went undefeated and said that they won the national championship, even though they're the only undefeated team that year. And Cincinnati was in the playoff. Houston's been really good. BYU's been up and down, but mainly up for the last few years. And so it should be fun to see those teams and what in how they match up against some of the topper some of the top teams.
Topper Harley.
Yeah.
And then right before we move to Big Ten, I was just going to say, and just a couple of sleepers as well, that you can never sleep on. I think Baylor, they've been really good the last few years. They had a losing season or a 500 season, I think last year. And so, but I think they're a team that can always just, punch someone in the mouth, if you're not being careful about it. And same with Oklahoma State, in my opinion, as well. So I think those
I
are
really
two
like
sleeper teams.
Yeah, I like Oklahoma State. Texas Tech is another sleeper in there. They were really good last year. I expect them to be pretty good this year. Yeah. But I think we get a Texas TCU Big 12 championship game there.
I don't. It would be cool to see that, but I'm not sure I can believe in. I want Sonny Dykes to do it again. Let's do that. If Sonny Dykes can do it again, then I'll 100% believe that he's a fantastic coach. I mean, he's a good coach. We know that right away. But I just need him to do it again. So I'm thinking of it's going to be maybe Texas and K State, in my opinion.
Okay.
I like the Texas prediction, but I'm fan of like a UCF being able to get there. That's who I'd go with.
That'd be really cool. I like that. Yeah. All right, Big Ten. Also, a lot of changes coming here after this season. A lot of Pac-12 teams moving over to the Big Ten, including Oregon and Washington. And there's other things happening that I can't think of right now. But Big Ten is getting a lot of changes as well. Big Ten is crazy good. Like Big Ten and SEC are those two conferences that are kind of above the others. And so you have Michigan, who has beat Ohio State 2 years in a row, have got to the college football playoff 2 years in a row, and haven't got to the championship game either of those years. But they should retool. Ohio State themselves should retool. Penn State's up there. Those three schools are probably top 10 in the entire nation. And then you've got Purdue as a possibility. Iowa is always good. Wisconsin's always good. So throw it to you guys. What do we think about the Big Ten this year?
First thing I want to mention is I know you had said this at the beginning of the podcast that all the conferences are going to a no division. I think Big Ten is still in divisions as
I think you're right.
East and West, but that might change in the future. I don't know. But currently they are. But yeah, I've been enjoying watching the Michigan Ohio State rivalry heat up in the last few years, and it has for sure. Michigan is good, and I know a lot of people are betting on them to get there again into the national championship. Ohio State's looking good too. A couple of sleepers I want to mention as well is I've always liked Minnesota. I think Minnesota is a team that can rise up out of nowhere, out of the ashes, and just knock you in the jaw. But I think other than Michigan, Ohio State, Wisconsin, there's also Penn State, of course, and Michigan State, which are really good teams. And so it's just Big Ten's always fun to watch. And the poor, Northwestern and Rutgers just get knocked around all year, every year. Um, but I think that I think it's going to be a Michigan, probably Wisconsin, Big Ten championship because Michigan's returning, I think, 9 players on offense or something like that, 8 players on defense, something crazy.
Including that quarterback, that's really good.
Yeah,
What's his name?
McCarthy,
McCarthy?
and then also
Yeah.
the running back Blake Corum as well, who's
Mhm.
if he doesn't get injured and stays the way he is, he might be a first round pick as well, maybe even top 15. But yeah, that's what I'm looking at for Big Ten. It's just an exciting conference to watch.
Yeah, those big four, Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, Wisconsin are kind of the big four in there. Michigan State sometimes is up there. And and there's not very much competition apart from those big four. Obviously, that competition is coming in the next couple of years. But you mentioned the Michigan Ohio State rivalry. It's been an exciting rivalry as of late, and expect that to continue this year. And expect those big four to all be top 25 end of year. And so as far as a winner, I think Michigan's going to be the conference championship again. I'd call it a toss up between the other three as to who's there with them.
Yeah, Dustin, your connection's really bad. I wonder if you can go off camera maybe and see if it helps. But yeah, we're kind of hearing you. It's staticky.
Yeah, it was kind of hard to follow what you were saying there, to be honest.
But
So
I could understand, but it was like listening to you in 0.5 speed. Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, and Dustin, and Cody, you both mentioned that the that conference is not all 15 or 14 teams, whatever it is now. It's still split into 7 team divisions, and I think that's a mistake because in one of those divisions you have the 3 best teams. You have Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State all in the one division, and so really it should be a Michigan, Ohio State, or a Michigan, Penn State championship game, but instead it's going to be Michigan trouncing Wisconsin or Purdue. Wisconsin's always seems to be good, but not to the same level, maybe as Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State have been.
I agree.
All right, moving to the Pac-12, which is going to very soon be the Pac-2, but or the Pac-0. I'm sure.
Pac-4, I believe, actually.
Is there 4 teams?
Oregon State, Washington State, Stanford, and Cal as of currently.
Is that it? Okay, so the Pac-4 after this year, but we still there's some really good teams in here, and Utah won the Pac-12 for the second year in a row last year, but the Pac-12 has been a conference that just eats itself apart, and so no team can be a representative to the college football playoff since the opening season of the college football playoff. I think Oregon was a representative in the first year, and I'm not sure there's been a representative since from the Pac-12 because they just tear each other apart. Washington was in there actually.
I think Washington, yeah, 2016 or something.
Yeah, but you got USC returning Heisman Trophy winner Caleb Williams. Caleb Am I right? Williams?
Caleb Williams. Yep.
For some reason I thought maybe that's a different last name, but he returns to USC. I think USC is primed for a big season, and they could be a representative in the final four there. That's my prediction, by the way, is a USC versus I want to say Utah as long as Cam Rising can actually stay healthy, but because Utah returns their starting quarterback as well. Uh, Washington is a big team to watch as well, and Oregon as well.
Yeah. Before I get to that part, I guess I'll first talk about the sleepers. I think in Pac-12 conference, I think um, Oregon State has been a good team lately. They've definitely be a team that can cause some damage. UCLA, of course, they have a great team as well. Um, and then yeah, so it's called kind of like the conference of quarterbacks this year. This is pretty cool. So it's Caleb Williams for USC, Bo Nix Oregon, Michael Penix Jr. for Washington, Cam Rising for Utah, and I'm probably even missing a couple others, um, but two of them, Caleb Williams and then Michael Penix Jr. are already on the Heisman watch again, and so I expect there to be a lot of really good games. I think Utah's going to have a hard time beating USC because they're going back to them this time in the Coliseum. Of course, they can do it, but it's just going to be tough. You're going to have everyone healthy, and Utah's going to have to travel for that, I guess. So I think it might be USC and Washington in the championship. Of course, I hope that Utah can be there. They definitely can be. But just based off my gut reaction, I think, in order, it's going to be USC, Washington, Utah, Oregon. I think it's going to be in that order, and I think it's Utah or USC and Washington in the conference championship.
That's a good bet. That's a great Heisman matchup between Williams and Penix. Yeah,
Hmm.
Dustin, can we hear you? Or-
I think USC is best set up for success. I'm especially returning Williams, right? That's the guy who won the Heisman is back. That doesn't happen very often, and so that's great. Um, so I would put them there. As you mentioned, Utah's probably best set up for success next, but there's a lot of other teams there that just compete with each other really well. So it's unfortunate that this conference is dissolving, but you have 8 good teams that looking for better opportunities elsewhere. So USC championship, and I'm gonna put Utah there.
Okay, moving on to the SEC, a big one that brings in Texas and Oklahoma next year, make a 16 team league. And this is, can anyone beat Georgia? Georgia's won 2 straight national championships. They've lost entire teams essentially to the last 2 NFL drafts, and it hasn't mattered.
To the Philadelphia Eagles.
To the Philadelphia Eagles. Yeah. So, but it hasn't mattered. Georgia just retools and wins the national championship again. Uh, Easy win over TCU, just insane. They do lose Stetson Bennett at quarterback, but who knows who's going to play quarterback now? I think there's 3 different players there. There's Carson Beck, there's Brock Vandegrift, and there's Gunnar Stockton. One of them is going to play quarterback, and one of them is going to play quarterback really well. They and so it doesn't seem to matter. Alabama's always there. Anytime Alabama's not in the college football national champion or in a playoff, it's a disappointing season for them, and they weren't last year. But they could be back. Can anyone unseat Georgia and Alabama?
I like how you're saying, anytime that Alabama's not in the playoff, it's a disappointment. And for the nation, it's also a success for everyone else. And so I've been enjoying that. I think, yeah, Georgia, Alabama, always good, no matter what. LSU, Tennessee, they're looking really good as well. Um, and so I think Alabama's coming back with some with red in their eyes. They're mad. They're going to come with some revenge. And I think that's going to be the championship game. Georgia Alabama is probably expected to be. And I don't. I think if they were to do, if Georgia were to win, I think this would be the first time that a team has won three back to back. I think. Um, I I'm gonna put. I hate saying this, but I'm gonna put my trust in Nick Saban. I think that he's gonna be able to pull something off this year. And Alabama would win that conference.
Dustin?
It's such an interesting conference because you have a team that is a really good team that may lose 4 games just because of how strong the conference is. And so, Georgia and Alabama are the top there, but it's so hard to say, okay, yeah, Georgia and Alabama, but then you're excluding Florida and LSU and Texas A&M and these other teams that are historically great and can be great. But yeah, I expect Georgia to be there again. They would have had an extremely strong recruiting class and great culture and coaching there. But I don't want to rule out a team like Florida from kind of having to be a toss up between Florida and Alabama as to who's there with them.
Yeah. For me, it's hard to say it's not going to be Georgia and Alabama, but for the sake of hoping, I really want Tennessee to be there. A Georgia Tennessee, and just because I want Tennessee to be in that championship game, they're not going to win. Georgia's going to beat them in that championship game, but just for that sake. So, in the last couple of minutes, any group of 5 teams you want to mention from any of those other conferences that could challenge. The one that I want to point out is Tulane, who returns a lot of players. They beat USC, although USC was kind of sleepwalking through that bowl game. Any other teams from the group of 5 you guys want to mention?
I was going to say Tulane as well, but just to make a different statement, I guess. What is it? WKU, Western Kentucky. They're always pretty good. They can be a sleeper as well, and so I think let's keep an eye out for them.
Boise State has had historically great seasons. Great to see them do it again.
Yeah. UTSA, watch out for them. They return everyone. Texas San Antonio. So I think they lose 1 player at all. So in the last minute and a half, college football playoff. There's 4 teams. Who's going to the college football playoff? 1, 2, 3, 4.
You go first, Dustin.
Georgia, USC, Michigan, Alabama.
I'm gonna go with 3 of those: Georgia, Michigan, USC, and I'm putting Texas in.
Wow. I'm gonna go Georgia, Michigan, Alabama, and I'm not sold with USC. So I'm just gonna say somehow Ohio State gets in as well. those 4. Not sure.
Championship, who wins, who plays? I've got a someone else go. I have to think.
I'll go ahead and go, and I'm going to switch Ohio State out for Washington instead. By the way, but I think it's going to be a Georgia Michigan again championship. Or again Georgia Michigan championship. I think Georgia should win it.
I'm taking USC over Michigan in the championship game. I think Georgia loses in the playoff.
Yeah, I'll go with the Georgia loss there. Put USC there. And let's go USC, Alabama.
All right. Sounds good. Next week we're talking NFL preview. And so excited